Sharon. Welcome.
Yes.
And thank you so much for agreeing to this webinar on on the Aharya Abhinaya of Odissi dance. We are so much looking forward to dwell in your well of knowledge and research on this extensive subject. And it is wonderful to be in your presence again. It's been so long, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, and I'm sure everyone here on the call too. So, thank you so much for your time.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tara, for suggesting the subject. And thank all of you who are here late at night, early in the morning, middle of the day, whatever. Go on. You wanted to say something else?
No, I'm not. It's all yours.
Yes. Okay. So, what I'd like to do is um, I'm going to give some background and I'm going to just a minute. Let me try to get. Okay, I'm going to spotlight this for everyone. Right. Okay. So Aharya obviously is everything on the outside, and I'm going to give some background and context, share some things that are general, then get into specifics. I'll give you my opinions on things as a reference for you finding what works for you, and then of course I'd love to take your questions. So first of all, I've prepared a few images, and let me come to this. The first part is focusing on the costumes. Let's see. I don't know why this. I'm sorry, this went to part two. There. So, first section will be about the costumes, and then the second section is about ornaments, and then makeup, and then hair. So, I'm occasionally asked, people say, does it really take you 2 hours to get ready? And this is my response. I say it takes a long time to turn into a heavenly being in Apsara. And that's what you have to look like. On the right, you can see Sanjukta Panigrahi, who was an Apsara, and it definitely takes time to do this transformation. So as we go through this, you'll be able to see some interesting varieties in choices in terms of the costumes, etc. So, just as an overview, Odissi dance, like other classical dance genres, gives importance to all of these things. So there's 4 times of expression. Forgive me for those of you that know this very well, but I just want to give a foundation for those that might not have covered this by chance. So you've got 4 forms of expression that are in Natya Shastra or Abhinaya Darpana. You've got your body movement, Angika. That's why your teachers are always saying Sudha Angika, good body positions and all. But the expression of the body. Then you have the vocal and sung, textual expression, the Vachika. You have the really important communication, the Sattvika, which is what's going to make it metaphysical or transport your audience. And then what we're talking about today is the expression through the costume, the makeup, and the ornaments. And of course, every classical and folk tradition has got a regional character. So when you go in India, even like 100 kilometers, you will have varieties in things like the textiles and even the jewelry. And so I'm going to spend a little time about the textiles of Odisha because there are variations you can do with the costumes, but there are parameters of the textiles that you need to use. So you've always need to have a sari from Odissi. And I'm going to show you some samples of the ikats that are from the other places when we get to that part, so you know the difference. And of course, silver jewelry, and the pith flowers. That's the trademark. Now, as you know, the dance that we're doing on the stage today is a combination of the dance that was done by the Maharis, who performed at Jagannath Puri, and of the boy dancers, the Gotipuras. So this is the costume of the Maharis. They wore this, especially on the left, you can see that black velvet bodice, and the sari is just wrapped from the waist down. On the right side, you have Maharis with the sari wrapped. It's a 9-yard sari going between the legs to make the like a dhoti, and then over the shoulder. Otherwise, like on the left, it would just be wrapped around, and then you have the waistband, which is the jobana. That's the length of cord with the tassels on the end. The name for that velvet blouse is the kamchila. And sometimes Odissi saris are called pata saris. They were up to 9 yards long. You don't find that really anymore. That's quite rare. In Maharashtra, you see the saris worn by fisherwomen where it's 9 yards. So it's worn as a dhoti, and then you have enough to go over the front palu as well. And then there's the apron like that around the hips, the nibibhanda. So now when Odissi, as we know it today, was first coming onto the stage, you just had your sari wrapped. And basically, I used to do this too, and that's a little bit like what you can see Kumkum Lal on the left, the black and white. You see she's got it just taking the sari, you take it like a dhoti, you tie it in a knot, you take it through and under, and you take the other, and you have to manage it so that you have the beautiful decorative, your palu, showing in the front. You will also notice that it was the fashion for many years in those days that the dupatta that we wore was made out of Banarasi silk organza. So it was relatively transparent. Not usually as transparent as kumkum as it looks. That might look that transparent maybe because of a flash camera, because they're usually obscure a little bit more. But we tended to just, that was the way, just to wrap it. And then you have this other wrapped sari coming around. There's another variety. So over the years, there were these various styles of tailoring. So basically, Kumkum Mohanty, who's having her makeup done by Guruji, she says that when she was a kid and she was really naughty and always making trouble, they'd wrap her up and they'd carefully get the front beautifully done, and then she'd say, I've got to go to the bathroom. And then they'd have to undo her. So that's when Guru Kailacharan Mahapatra said, let's figure out a way that we can have a tailor make it so that you can step into it. And that's how we got divided. So you've got the pants part, which look a little bit like a dhoti, and you put that on. And then you take the decorative part, the palu, and that would be made as a fan in the front. So that was similar to what you had when you tied a sari. And then you had a separate piece that would go over your hips, and that was the bottom. And then the top you have your blouse and you have your dupatta. So this was standard. So this is the design. that we actually did for a long time, which is actually a little less popular now. Now everyone's doing what we call the Mahari style, which I'll get to. So, with this design, it either snapped or hooked on. And here, as I mentioned, I'm using a transparent Benares organza dupatta. Now, because it's an actual silk dupatta, you can see that the end of the dupatta is not tucked in. It's coming out on the right side underneath my belt. And on the figure in the center, you can see when you have a stitched dupatta like that, a stitched dupatta, then it's always tucked in. I notice mostly with children's shows that children they rent costumes and they don't understand that it's not a decoration to have the back part of the dupatta sticking out. And so there's the pieces. Okay, so in that costume design, typically the blouse was made from the same material as the cloth draping in front. Although I discovered that although the tailors in Odissi were absolutely fine with making sometimes two blouses out of this material that they made the costume from, but in Delhi, some of the tailors, like at Bhartikala Kendra, they really didn't have a very good way of cutting their costume pattern. And so they wanted separate material for the blouse, which didn't always really match, or they didn't use silk, or they used art silk. Again here, this is the organza dupatta, but I've taken the border from the sari and added it on so that it would give some definition. So then, what's probably more popular now is this vertical design, which is closer to, in a way, what's called Mahari temple dancer style, in a way. I mean, they're both variations on that. So here's like 3 variations of that. Now, in the center, Sanjukta Panagrahi has plain silk. You have a traditional the border, we'll talk about later, but there was a fashion that we would add the temple design, that the tailor would stitch that zigzag pattern, which is called a temple design. And so some saris have that as part of the weaving, but when it isn't there, to make it more interesting, this was added. And so here you've got 3 variations on this. Now, there's obviously, you see a lot of variation in what people do in terms of the length or the angle of the design. But basically, it's draped in the front, and it can be made out of any of the sari traditions of the state. Basically, it's most things are either from Sambapur, Berhampur in the south, Ganjam district, or Cuttack, the Kutki saris. All right. Now, this is interesting. These are both Madhavi Mudgal, who has just absolutely wonderful aesthetic sense in terms of color and design. And she has been very creative in her saris. Now, you'll notice when you look at the one on the left, the orange, Madhavi is very photogenic, but if you notice carefully, you can see that she's very long-waisted. And because she's very long-waisted, the obvious thing is if you're short-waisted, you have long legs. And if you're long-waisted, then your legs are not as long. And so her very long use, the way she has the palu coming in the front, makes, it's just a beautiful way of working with what works best for her. So one thing that you have to think about as and when you get costumes made is which designs, not just are nice designs, but which designs actually suit your figure. So if you are very long-waisted, then you might want to do something like this with this kind of a length, right? And now, as you can see, the variations of like different colors and with blouse and dupatta. And this is also Madhavi's dancers. Now here, she not only has the very long pattern, long palu in the front, but she's eliminated the hip piece in the back, which is an interesting design. It gives it a sleek look. Again, it works for these dancers who are very slender, and it's an option. And then also, of course, she's gone for these very muted colors, and the blouses have very minimal borders. So you just have a tiny indication of it. So that's an aesthetic that's an option. And of course, Ramli, two things. This wearing the wrapped costume shorter is something that Rita Devi, who was a disciple of Pankaj Babu, Pankaj Charan Das, she also wore it very short like that. And I think also within the tradition of Deva Prasad Das, that's there. Now here, okay, so they have it wrapped. You see this kind of wrapping more with male dancers than female. But he's doing it with his dancers, and, it's an aesthetic choice. The only thing is, his dancers in Malaysia very often are dancing without a dupatta. And this is very controversial in Odisha. Basically, most people in Odisha don't approve of it, that you really need to have the dupatta across the front. However, given the different figures, so for Asian dancers east of India, there's a younger, more androgynous look, you could say. So it doesn't look vulgar when someone without a lot up front doesn't have a dupatta. But for anybody who has a little more there, it does tend to look vulgar. So again, these are aesthetic choices the dancers have made. Not appreciated in Odisha to some extent, and yet, it works and they're successful. So these are like the ranges. So now, getting into the background about the saris. So as I said, Sambapur, Berhampur, and Cuttack. Now, all of the saris are woven on a loom, and one thing that's particular about many of these traditions is that they are either a single or a double ikat, which I'm going to explain. And that, basically, ikat is you take the threads, a bunch of threads, and you tie-dye it along the way. And then when you tie-dye it, and then you put that on the warp of the loom, and then if you tie-dye another set that's woven through it, through both the warp, both sides, then you get these previously dyed parts magically made to match up and make patterns, and you get a little bit of a bleed because it's not such a sharp line, although it can be made with almost no bleed when you're really, really very, very fine in silk. So Ikat, this dyeing of the threads before you weave it into the cloth, either single or double, went to Indonesia from Odisha, and you have all of the incredible ikats developed in new traditions throughout Indonesia, all very different, through Java and Bali. In India, you have 3 places that have ikat. You've got Odisha, you've got Andhra Pradesh, which is where, which is right on the border, and the border has shifted up and down a bit, right? And you have in Gujarat. And I think maybe rather than stopping the slideshow, maybe I'll show you those afterwards, the variations, because it's very important that if you get an Ikat sari to use for a costume, it should not be an Andhra, because people can tell, and certainly not a Gujarati one. And I just made a note that for those of you that get your that are able to get your costumes made in India and choose your saris, if you tell any, maybe any sari store, but definitely any government sari store or any major sari emporium in Orissa that you're a dancer, they will give you a discount. They usually give a 10%, 10 or 15%. All right. So here's the designs. So on the right, what you're seeing in white with the orange temple design, those are Rudraksha beads. Those are actually the holy beads worn by aesthetics. And these date all the way back 2,500 years. And so you can also see the temple design, and you can see these don't have fish, but sometimes there's fish, shank, conch shells, and of course the temple spires. So like the blue, that is kind of a modern kind of a temple design, but it's okay. It's a very traditional sari. You've got your Rudraksha, you've got your flowers, and the spires are the temple design. And that is a patta sari from Berhampur. Let's see now. Oh yeah, and this is just there to show you the temple design. Temple design. And I'll just mention, like some things that I'll hit later. You'll see that on the right, Kumkumahanti. I can't tell. It looks like that might be a gold necklace. We used to mix gold around the face for those that had gold, and not just silver. And you see how Sanjukta, she wore a double band here with her jewelry. But so on the right, the temple design is in the sari, and on the left, it's been put on by the tailor. Okay, so when you look at this, the blurriness in that design is because of how the yarn is lined up. And, this is a very neat job, so it's almost perfect. So you don't really need to know all of this, but I just wanted to put it all together for you anyway. So the varieties of Sambapuri saris include, and we use a lot of Sambapuri saris, but include Sonapuri, Pasapali, Bamkai, I can't read that.
Barpali.
Barkali saris, thank you. Most of them named after, of course, the place they come. They all can be called Pata. Now, the Nuwa Patna silk in Cuttack district, that is actually the saris that are used for the murtis of Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balabhadra at the Jagannath temple, which have Git Govinda actually woven in Ikat. And the Ikat by the Bullas in Western Odisha, some people consider that really, spectacular. It's got double Ikat compared to Eastern. Western meaning like, again, Cuttack area. And in Western, there's all these places that it comes from. So these are some names. You've got all of these varieties. And here's a couple of samples. So this Bachitrapuri Sambalpuri sari, you can see on the left, you've got the duck, you've got that double pattern. Now that is not such a great sari for a costume. And in fact, the one on the far left, that typical one with the checkerboard, with the white things, which is really a fabulous sari. But someone who was, well, I won't say who it was, said it was a very jungly design because it was so tribal to them. On the right, you can see some of the different kinds of motifs. But it'd be challenging to use that for a costume. Now, the Bomkai, clearly this is good for a costume because you've got a lot of contrast in the palu and in the borders. And you can get them in any colors, including, white and all. When I made my very first costume, I wanted to make it in white. And Guruji wouldn't allow it because of an association of white with widows. And so he insisted that I get a colorful first one. And after that, it would be fine for me to make white saris, costumes, which I did. And then I experimented by making like one in black too. Okay. One of the things, you can see these little booties, these small dots on the left. That's very typical from a Bomkai sari. And so the palu warp and the main sari section get joined. So there's the contrast. So either of these saris are excellent for a costume, depending on how you want to wear it. And one thing is I noted at the bottom. So Ganjam district, which is down on the border with Andhra, is where the Bomkai started. But then Ramai Devi introduced them to Sonapur, so they're also Sonapuri saris. So you don't have to remember all these names, but see what the styles are. Again, now one thing that you could consider, these are cotton saris. And I have made maybe a half a dozen costumes in cotton. And in my opinion, it's far better to make a costume out of cotton than art silk. Art silk looks like artificial silk. You should either wear silk or cotton. Art silk, to me, is too theatrical in an artificial way. I like to think that what you are dancing as something that comes from a temple tradition is something that you would not present as artificial if you were dancing in a temple. You would be as real as you could be. So these are some samples of cotton saris. And then I have a picture somewhere. I'll show. Yeah, I got one here. Right. Okay, now let's see. Why did I put this in here? Okay, so instead of the blouse matching, obviously it's contrasting, and it has the temple design. And also, I've used the palo. There's other things with the palo. Sometimes putting the palo here, I've used the palo on the front and the back of the blouse. So obviously they're not always plain. You can decorate that way. Now, this is something, I don't know whether you've seen this before, but this is a tradition of adding a dupatta, sheer organza dupatta. This was done as part of a production for television where I was nature, Rituraj. But Guruji used to put this kind of a dupatta on top when a dancer was specifically being Radha in the Git Govinda, especially in like if it was a dance drama. But also it could be done for a solo as Radha. And that would be the way one would wear it. You would just have it over the white flowers. And you can see the, the curl, the makeup, and these things we'll get to. So this is an option that's not out of tradition. Okay, here's a cotton sari that I'm wearing. I think I first made my cotton sari because I was doing this subaltern Fakir Mohan Senapati, the first novelist of Orissa over 100 years ago. And so it didn't seem appropriate to be glamorous, so I made out of cotton. But I've used it for lecture demonstrations and programs. And the blouse is not taken from the sari. The blouse is separate material, but that's coordinated. And, I think it works just fine. So that's something for you to consider because it's getting very expensive. Okay, and just some last pointers about the costume. You need to obviously secure things. So you have your dupatta. Let me find a dupatta. Sorry. This has a cord tied. Okay. Yeah. You have your dupatta and you tie it. So you should definitely put a pin here from underneath. But the pins that you put here and here, I would recommend that you use a gold pin. They'll be less visible because depending on how far your audience is, they don't need to be seeing safety pins. So a little small gold pin here, and if needed there. Another thing that's very important is the strings. The strings are supposed to be at your waist. So I see many dancers nowadays wearing the strings like here, and then you're looking at strings. That's basically the equivalent of like looking at bra straps as far as the design is supposed to be. This should go to the waist. If you get a costume and the tailor has made it with the strings up there, cut them and lower them down. The string should be right at your waist, and you need that to be adjusted. And also, as I said, this back part here, after the string, is of course always tucked in. Now, and as I showed you with the examples, if it's an unstitched dupatta, then you can tie it at the side, and then it can be added to show. Okay, and now let me show you some actual samples. Right. So, as I said, it's important that your sari is an Odia sari, and you're all familiar with what those look like. Now, let me show you what the others look like. First, this is an Ikat, but it's from Gujarat. Let's see. Right? So you can see the way it also bleeds, and it has these designs, but it is definitely not looking like it's from Orissa. This is a really lovely sari my mom got when she was down in Kutch. Now, this is a Andhra Ikat, Puchampali, right? So but this is definitely not like any of those Sambalpuri or Berhampur or from Cuttack, Bomkai, any of those kinds of saris. Let's see, what does the palu look like? Okay, so this is not similar, not close enough. So please, the reason I emphasize this is that if you were to order a sari from tailors like from Narthaki who do Bharatanatyam, they may not be as careful about where they're sourcing the silks that they use, because what they use for Kuchipudi they might think is just fine, and it isn't. So this would be great. If it was an Odia sari, it would be fine. But this is definitely not an Odia design. Let's see. Let's see if you can see the difference. The way that these flowers look and the way it is here. They're definitely, they're in the same family, but they're different. All right. Now, for many decades, the costumes of choice were like this. This is a blouse and the pajama, and they had the designs all over with a nice contrasting border, and of course there was the front. But lately, people aren't going in so much for these full things. They want to be a little more streamlined and with just like one color and less borders. If you have a costume that is stitched fan style and it doesn't have lining, then we always had a short pajama underneath so that the knees didn't wear out on the costume. And it's always a good idea to make two blouses if you can, because they will get worn out. And one of the things, I'll give you here's a little thing. This is purchased, and this I made myself. And what this is, it's a blouse shield. So basically, this goes, before you put your blouse on, you put this here, and you can just put like one pin so it doesn't move. If your blouse is a little loose, it doesn't shift. So this goes right underneath, and that means you will never have any sweat circles and you won't spoil your blouses. And all this is cotton with some plastic inside, right? So it's 2 layers, right? And on the inside is some plastic, and just stitch the corner, and it just goes like that. And so I just put it into the blouse with one pin on the seam, And then afterwards, you take this off and you wash it, and it'll give a longer life to your costume. And but this, I think, seem to have bought somewhere. So these are available. And then also, there used to be a kind that were made for, you could get it in an old lady store, which went around and hooked and had a dress shield, which was used by women for under their silk blouses for in the West when ladies wore silk blouses. Let's see the samples that I have. Right. So instead of the all over design, people go in more for this that I showed you. And here's another one I pulled out, which has the temple design and the palo in the front there. So before I go on to costumes, onto makeup and ornamentation and alta and everything, let me see what questions you have about costumes. Yes.
Thank you. It's actually very interesting, all this what you said. Thank you. And then I was thinking about all these adjustments, because sometimes certain things don't suit certain individuals. We may like something more elaborate, or we may like something more simple. And how sometimes I'm thinking, how far can we go? Because some people can, for example, may not like really so much jewelries and not that much flowers, and like everything like really simple or very simple. And sometimes I heard from people in Orissa that they are very critical about any tiny changes or anything. So I think already this what Madhavi Mudgal presented, they would be definitely criticizing, want to speak about other things. So I'm also thinking, how much shall we bother with all this? Because I'm sorry that I say so much, but I think it's maybe something that you can elaborate on, because on another end, we have the style now that is something like belly dance with Odissi. And sometimes you can see like really beautiful combinations, like a blend of both, but same time, to me, obviously it looks really nice, but Odissi dance is something different for me. Although I know this type of dance as well, but I never mix them to that. I never mix them like this, because it's just a different culture. And I think this temple dance is like, for temple, for God, etc. So that's, we have this on another end, and with the like more explicit dress. So perhaps I just ask many questions this way, but my apologies if it's too much.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's about very important points. Yes. So both in your dance, the choreography, and in this Aharya, it's like finding what are the parameters and what is going beyond the pale. This is the question, because obviously there's choices and things shift, things are organic. As I said in the beginning, the whole idea of the stitched costume was something that was, created because it was inconvenient to be tying, but it was based on and blah, blah, blah. Okay. First of all, when you're doing something that is something like Odissi and belly dance or something, or a contemporary mixed, or any kind of a mixed thing, you have the option as a dancer to do whatever you want with whatever training you have. You just can't call it Odissi. you can say it's based on Odissi. You say, inspired by or drawing on these things. But when you're doing Odissi, you're within a certain parameter. Now that means that, as I said, I would say that it's pretty much a golden rule that you use an Odia sari, okay? And that's not too hard. Another thing that I didn't mention is you can take actually plain silk or some other silk and use an Odia border. And nowadays you can buy actual just borders, or you could buy a beautiful cotton sari and use that border on plain silk, which would be also less expensive and is very beautiful. I remember first I was aware of this when Raja Radha Reddy, who were the Kuchipudi artists, they liked beautiful silks that they saw, I think, in Hong Kong when they were traveling. And then they added on the Andhra borders that were appropriate. So that's one thing. The other thing is that you can definitely minimize how elaborate. So now I'm not getting yet into the hair and the costume because I'm going to do that piece by piece. Just talking about the saris and this part. As I say, people have moved away from the costumes that had the borders, had designs all over. However, it might be very nice to go back to that, you see. It might be a nice change from what you see all of the time. There's also a difference between the kind of costumes that are used in what's called ballets, dance dramas, which can be very bold and theatrical in a way that is maybe not as aesthetic for a soloist. There's the differences of your blouse being short or being longer. You can range those things. The blouse is short, but you can also have a blouse that goes all the way down, which is what I've been doing for quite a while now. It goes down in the waist. One of the things that I think that you should keep in mind in addressing everything, makeup, hair, ornaments, and costume, is what do you want the audience to see? Do you want them to see you and the dance, or do you want them to see gorgeousness? It's like a bride. Do you want to choose the gorgeous dress so that everyone says, gosh, what a gorgeous dress? Or do you want them to choose a dress that they're going to say, oh, what a beautiful bride? So I think the bottom line in terms of how much you put on you is, is related to, you want them to see the dance, number one. And because they're seeing the dance, they will feel that you're beautiful. And everything you're wearing is adding to that communication. Whereas if you come out looking like, just an amazing doll, and also you need to show your own personality, which isn't so much, when we get into makeup, I'm going to talk about that. It's like, so again, in the costuming, as I said, it's like whether or not you feel it suits you to have a side fan or a variety or the front. whether that fan, we used to, some of my costumes with the fan, well, like you saw with the one with Romley where it was wrapped and it was very short, folded over. So my fans used to just be like at the knee. But actually, in a way, the length of our fan in the front was kind of like the equivalent of how long kurtas were. So when the fashion was kind of short kurtas, or the suit, our fans were just like this, right? And now they're lower down, and also kurtas tend to be lower down. So, those are things that kind of go up and down with time. If you had a costume that was completely plain, it wouldn't be clear that the sari was from Orissa. And you could get away with that if you wanted to be that simple because of the jewelry. But there are lovely saris that have just a very small border if one wanted to go in that, quiet, elegant thing. But then again, you see, okay, so you've got your own personality. Madhavi has this fabulous aesthetic. She went to architecture school. And the aesthetic is what you can call white on white. It's really subtle. It's very elegant. It's gorgeous. And things are sculpturesque. It's great, but it's not better than something else. All right. And I don't know, I think it's where I'm showing jewelry. I'll show you like some things that Sonal has done. Recently, I did this Mudra and the Diamond Sphere collaboration, and it was interesting that the dancer in England that I did it with, we had to do a live part besides a film that was made together. And without having discussed it, what she did as a Bharatanatyam trained artist, she wore the Bharatanatyam costume, talking about how to be simple, with no makeup. Maybe she had a bindi, but no makeup, no ornamentation, and no jewelry at all. And what I did was I actually had a little bit of makeup and some jewelry and the hair, but just did it in a sari, in no costume. So that was kind of interesting. I think the question, I think if I go on to my next section, it'll address these things more in terms of the makeup. But I think you have to decide your own aesthetic. It's just like what you want to communicate through the dance. See, look, the dance we're doing on the stage, we're not Maharis. And so when you're on a theatrical stage, it's up to you, your personality, and what you've gotten from your teacher or teachers as to what are you giving to the audience. Are you giving them a wonderful entertainment? Absolutely gorgeous? Are you showing how beautiful you are? Are you showing your pyrotechnics in the dance? Are you showing like, boy, what an accomplished young daughter-in-law if you chose me for your son, in an Indian tradition of learning dance? Or are you wanting to create a metaphysical space with the communication, the sattvic abhinaya? And in that case, whatever you're doing in terms of this aharya is in order to help that communication reach the audience, right? And it should look like you. That's another thing too. You shouldn't be so one of the things, when we get to the makeup part, is that just like lighting on the stage, should not call attention to itself, but it should illuminate you. You know, it should make it visible. And so the makeup that you wear is so that you're readable to the audience. But you shouldn't disappear so that you look like anybody else, you know. Anyway, so I'll get more into that. Any other questions about costumes? Yes, Satya.
So one of the limitations of not being in India is that for example, I wouldn't know where to shop for borders or which tailor to go to for what style. And if I wanted to, take your presentation and say, hey, I like this style, I like this design, let me try and create a costume out of that, I have no idea where to go. And I was wondering if you had, maybe not now, but, in an email, you could send recommendations of, for borders, for plain silk, for this type of saris, for this and that. This tailor does this design very well. Yeah.
Yes. So no, that's very important. In the next, when I talk about jewelry, I'm giving you some addresses and some contacts. Okay. One thing is costumes can be ordered online, internationally. You can give your measurements, and you can say the design that you want, and pray, and you get that. Another thing is, okay, for my first costume, I had just done a workshop with Guruji for like two and a half months. And I just wanted to do it as an introduction. And he was like, no, you really have to make a costume. You have to dance. He taught me 3 items in 2 months. So he had Kavita Shridrani, who was the daughter of the director of Triveni Kala Sangam. She had her go with me to choose the correct sari from the Orissa Emporium or wherever. And then she took me to Ganapati, who was the tailor. That was really essential. I would say that for where you are, okay, so as I say, there are online sources. And that's why I say, don't get something in art silk, get it either in cotton or get it in silk. When you don't have these options of like cotton and choose the border and cut and everything, unless you get somebody who's going to get it done. One way is that people ask someone who's going, this is what I want, right? And so they could like have your measurements and you could say, I want like, a peacock blue or an emerald green. I'd like this kind of a border, not too much that. You could kind of figure out, looking at all of the varieties of kind of what you want, depending on what they can find. And you can say, if you can, this is what I want. I mean, the thing is, things have gotten very expensive. And it's a huge investment to get, that's another reason for simpler saris too. I mean, the less work, the less Ikat and all, then that's there. But also a lot of the times the quality of the silk is less, like it's a mix or things aren't so good. But if you were to get like a silk cotton mix and it's a mix, that could be fine. Little extra for ironing, but worth it. Okay, now in terms of like where you are in the Bay Area, Catherine Kuniraman stitches saris. I mean, it stitches costumes for Bharatanatyam. I don't know what her health is like and if she would do it for somebody for Odissi, but you could ask Catherine, just because she could definitely do it. I'm just amazed. This woman has a sewing machine and she makes costumes for all of her students, and she could certainly make one. Then the second thing is, you ask someone like Rohini, you can even ask like whether she could tell you, you ask her to show you how to wear it tied, how to take a sari and how to tie it. So you might have like a separate dupatta, and then have the costume either coming over the front or with the pallu in the front. So I mean, there are options, and um, and you can look at a lot of costumes online and figure them out. But I've seen, um, you know, um, for instance, in like the Bharatanatyam costume makers, they will tell you exactly this measurement, this measurement, this measurement. So you could do all those measurements, but send them to an Odia tailor. But those are the measurements they would need, but they're not organized enough to ask you, you know? So that, yeah.
Sharon, what do you think about skin tone in costumes, skin and hair tone in costumes? Like, do you have any comments on people who have lighter skin? What is the best color costumes for them, or people who have olive skin or darker skin?
Yeah. Listen, you know what colors work for you, basically. I don't go for beige, I mean, something that's too close to a skin color, isn't going to be a nice costume. But obviously, well, see, let me put it this way: if you wear like a white costume, but the contrasting border is going to give the definition, and that would be fine. I mean, you see, again, your colors. I can't wear yellow. Yellow's a nice color, but when I wear yellow, if yellow makes me look jaundiced. Gold, mustard is okay, but yellow, it's the skin tone. Another thing is in terms of colors that there's also a question of like what size audience you have. I have costumes that I wouldn't wear on a giant stage, but I would wear for a smaller stage. So, for instance, um, um, something like, I didn't bring out a whole lot, but like I love, for instance, blue and green. I mean, purple and green. But and this is a really beautiful costume, but I wouldn't wear this um, maybe on a stage that was, more than 650 people, if it was 1,000, or, in other words, if I'm doing something and it's going to be thousands of people at a distance, then I'm going to wear like a bright rose colored with a big bold design, something like that. But as far as color, I mean, tell me, what's your concern when you're asking about color? What are you thinking?
I guess that's what you answered. Like, what are the best colors for the skin tone in, what is really, I remember my first, no one guided me when I purchased my first costumes. And I think I went on to buying like brown for the first one, like a very beigey brownish color, and then a very weird art silk one after, I guess. And it was just so wrong. And so I just wish I had someone guiding me, for what is the best, but also like what is really good for stages with like a big audience, and what is really appropriate for like smaller audiences. When is it good to wear like a full-on sari, or just like a normal sari and just put jewelry on top of it, like Just those ideas.
One thing that actually I remember Sanjukta Panagrahi. I mean, she always went full out. If it's a lekdem, full costume. And I think that is the best thing to do maximum as much as you ever possibly can. Because first of all, the people in your audience, they'll think if you're standing there in a kurta that that's a costume for the dance. They don't know that you're just like standing around like the equivalent of a leotard instead of a tutu and showing ballet, right? I mean, you really should show as much as possible. If you do decide not to wear full costume, then it should be like a half sari, but with everything else. And in fact, one thing is in the West, our background always was that when you leave the theater, your makeup is off. You don't leave the green room. You don't leave the dressing room without taking everything off. But Sanjukta always kept her makeup and everything on after the program, going to the dinner with the sponsors and the host. And her feeling was that you want to maintain the magic. And so, and also, whenever there's a dinner after a program, there's also a limited amount of time. But basically, what I would do now is, what I would recommend after a program is you keep your makeup on, you keep your hair, you definitely get out of your sari, your costume, which is wet, and you put on a sari. And you can keep everything else. Just take off your silver belt, change into a sari, keep the rest, take off the mukut. So it's just the flowers around. That part is only for on the stage. And that's it. No, Brown was wrong. Brown was wrong, but it's like, who knew? It's just like, I wanted right. I mean, that black costume that I have, I was inspired by Indrani Raman, who had a black costume. And I was like, wow, that's really elegant. And so I made that black costume, which has a nice contrasting red border. I mean, I'm not looking like Morticia, right? It's got a nice red border and everything, and it's really looks nice. Oh, here's something else that's really important. And it's one of these things that you learn and then you forget that you know it, and then you're in trouble again. If you ever possibly can, find out what is the background against which you're dancing, because it's really disconcerting to show up in a red costume and there's a red curtain behind you. Or in your brown costume would have been fine with a red curtain, but not black or brown, right? And it's really worthwhile to know what's going to be behind you. But I mean, look, basically you want to be fairly bright, but you don't want to be garish bright in terms of like choosing costumes. Going for beige, tussar, or subtle is not the thing. Yeah, Satya?
I think Nikita had a question first.
Yeah.
Yes, my question is, do you have any recommendations for choosing a costume that will be for like a photo shoot outside or a performance outside versus inside in an auditorium or a theater? Like, what are the choices or decisions you would make?
Well, okay, so one thing is when you're doing things, especially when you're doing for media, sometimes they don't want certain colors. For instance, white is not going to be good, probably. In a studio, the white may be, too much. Usually they don't want green. Very often for TV, they don't want green because it has to do with the lights. And when you're outside, again, it's a question of what's your background. So if you're going to be doing it by a fountain, that's different if you're doing it with greenery. And so it's very important to think about what that combination is going to be. And also outside, if it's an outside performance, like what's the background too, you know. You generally won't go wrong with red. You know, red's pretty good for everybody. Um, but it can also be maroon. You know, if you're not a red person, right? You know, if you don't want to go full on fire engine red, go for maroon, and you know, which is a little more elegant, but it's still, got some chroma. And I mean, I feel like I should wheel out some costumes and show you. Do you want me to do that?
Sharon has an amazing, extensive collection of costumes. You should do an exhibit.
Okay, so let's see. Here's a bunch of white with red.
Wow.
These are old. Okay, so here it's like, see, the palu is on the blouse on the back, and it's a side one. And then some of these, yeah, so it's this Mahari style with this showing like that, right? And the dupatta, I've got two dupattas to choose from, either the silk one or else just a red one like that. And then here's another one, white, with a bigger border, and this is kind of shorter. And again, this organza with the matching border, or else just a red. You know, this is like when you go to a sari store, and they like throw out all the saris, so you look at everything. Okay, here's another one, white and maroon, and here's another one like that. That's a bunch of whites. Now, this is one that I'm very fond of. This is Berhampur silk. Do you see? It's quite old, but it has a kind of shine to it, which is nice. That's quite lovely. And see, and this is a very elegant, not too gaudy, because it's just maroon. It's got this and a small border.
I'd also like to suggest that having that piece that goes around the waist, that extra piece, it's really good. Like if you are wide hipped like me, like I have wide hips, so I love having that extra piece that goes around the waist, because it really defines.
I mean, personally, I would not want a costume without it, but I also feel that looking at those costumes, well, let me put it this way. The sample that I showed you of Madhavi's dancers without it, it was very aesthetic. It was very aesthetic. But I've seen other dancers not using it, and it looks awkward or clumsy, or it just either doesn't look like it's finished off nicely, or it looks like it's too hippie. I mean, so it depends on the individual, right? But this part going around the hip is very important, really, for giving that shape. I agree with you. Okay. Now, This was kind of an unusual choice of color, orange. Orange with black. And the blouse is cotton, I think. See? Orange. Not the best color, but it's okay. Simple design. But it has, if you'll notice, it has this all over design on the ikat, on the costume. So it's not like just a bold, bright, bright orange. Yeah, this was one of my favorites.
Is that purple?
Yeah. This is purple, and there was for a short time, there was this really lovely fashion where the saris had these lines running up and down, which I found very slimming. See? So you've got this in the pants. So you've got this vertical line, which is good. This is the back. And then here's the front. So it has like the stripes of the leg.
That's
Indeed.
very unusual. You don't see that.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. I don't know why they're not making this anymore. It was
It's really beautiful.
very nice, yeah. And a blouse like that. And then for the dupatta, either again, the organza dupatta or a plain one. That's nice. Here's your standard red. This is like one of my first costumes. So it has, it's this kind of ikat. And maybe they don't make it because it's expensive. I don't know. Or the quality of the silk. But basically red and purple. I mean, basically you do want contrast. One thing for sure. It shouldn't be so subtle that there's nothing different between the border and the
It's gorgeous. That is stunning.
see, here, I'm trying to show you the fan, you see. So that you've got, for the fan, you've got, you know, a contrast there. It's visible. I mean, that's important.
It's funny because now if we go to your channel and we see you performing all of these costumes, now we can recognize some of them that you're showing.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, because you've seen these, right? Here's this green fish. See the fish? Here. See the fish?
Yeah.
So you've got your fish border there. And
Is there a symbolism to the fish?
fish are fertility, fish are good luck, fish are for marriages. A lot of stories with fish, right? But it's interesting because it's, I don't know how well the color comes through there. It's a rosy pink, but with a mossy green.
Gorgeous.
So it's,
Beautiful.
yeah, so it's
I
fair.
love pink.
Yeah, pink is good,
Pink is a good color.
right?
Dark pink.
And then depending on how much pattern you have on your palu, you see some, like this one, might not be enough. Some, you can use part of it here, depending on whether you want it to go from there just a little bit, or whether you want it to come farther, depending on where you want it to start. And then otherwise, you can use some of it on the blouse, if you want, on the back of the blouse. This is another green and pink. Looks like this is mixed. Orange. And, yeah. And this is very similar because I liked that one and got worn out. I tried to get the same color of green, kind of this forest green with the purple. So I tried to replicate it. Okay, now
One question I have is, do you ever pick the color depending on what you're going to perform as well? Do you make any correspondences between characters you're portraying or stories you're telling?
well, at times, yes. When I did my Mahadevi Upasana, which is all of the Devis, so I used to have more tantric colors. I had a white with red, and I added on a black line so that I would have all the three colors, black, red, and white. Okay, let's see. Oh, this is one that's nice. Green with red. I've got a lot of greens. That kind of a border. Okay, here's the, yeah, I'll show you the cotton one. Okay, oh, here's another one. This is always good. Can't go wrong with red and black. Here, I'll just show you how that goes.
Beautiful.
So you've got your temple design, and it's simple. Okay.
Sharon, do you have any suggestions in how to store these silk costumes in a way that they don't get destroyed by climate, humidity or bugs or anything? Any suggestion?
Well, bugs are going to be an issue if there's protein, like if they're sweaty. First of all, after you perform, always lay your costumes out and let them completely dry before you pack them. You really, I mean, you take them home, but if you take them home or you take them to your hotel or whatever, but immediately spread them out and let them dry. Okay, and then as far as storage goes, if you don't have space to hang them, like I have these just in a trunk, right? In a plastic trunk on wheels. And here, you don't want to use mothballs because it's stinky. But you could put silicone if you think that's an issue. It depends where you are. I mean, if you're in a place with humidity, you need to have things like silicone that'll keep it from getting moldy. Okay, here's a sample of a cotton costume. This one is made, so here's the pajama. This is the dupatta here. I mean, this is not very bright. I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to you. It's a little dull, but I'm 72, so I don't want to be looking like I'm pretending I'm 25 or 35. Okay, and this is the very nice fan in the front, which is a little bit long design. and then a blouse that's in contrasting but related colors. See, with the fan. So that's a cotton. And this is another cotton. Again, it's in a kind of a duller color, but it's got a nice red too. It's cotton. And this is the one that I think I had shown you in the picture. See, like this. So what I was saying, maroon, if you don't want to go for a bright red. But don't go duller than any of these. These are about as dull as you'd want to be. And you were asking about, like for a lek dem, there's a few more old things down here. Oh. What's this? That's a nice, oh, this is a nice color. And again, it's that Berhampur shiny silk. Which is
very nice color. Oh, that is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
That is beautiful.
Yeah. This is. So let's see. Yeah.
Are the edges purple-ish and the costume blue?
Okay, so here's the pajama. Here's the pajama, right? This is purple, right?
Gold. Wow, that is beautiful.
It's purple, and it's just a beautiful Berhampur, this shiny, nice blue. This is made, it says Odissi Tailors, Chandi Chowk, Bhagirat Tailors, Chandi Chowk, okay. Okay, that's, and then the blouse, then here, because I'm using a transparent dupatta in the front, so I've used part of the design of the sari on the front of the blouse.
Oh, that's nice.
Right? And then just means a purple, semi-transparent dupatta, so you can see that there. And then this is the hip thing. You could call it the fanny binder, right? Here. Now, with some of the side designs, these are stitched as a part of it. Some of these.
Which means they already are on the pants.
They're on the pant, yeah.
Yeah.
They make the pant and they make it with this also.
Okay.
And then also another thing one can do, I don't know where, somebody's got some of it, where you have like a little frill that you can attach with like a hook, you know, it's got a couple of hooks, and it comes here. So that's kind of like as though the dupatta were coming. It can be on the side. You can see that in some of the designs there. Yeah. But like this is, you see, but like, I mean, this, I'm sure, is the kind of color combination that would work for anybody. You know, something like this.
Blue
but-
is a good color.
Yeah, blue is good, green is good. And then, but you see when you go into the, and yellow is absolutely beautiful for people that it works on. I mean, if you can wear yellow, that's nice. That's nice. Although you do have to be aware when you wear a light colored thing like yellow and even white, if you happen to have dances with you sitting on the floor and you've got dirty stages, you can have challenges, with your costumes, how many times you can wear them before cleaning. And as far as cleaning go, okay, so one thing is I showed you that depending on how the costume is designed, if it doesn't have a lining, then it's a good idea to wear like something underneath. I mean, we had made these cotton dupatas, but you could obviously just wear any kind of something short yoga pant or something underneath that would give protection to the costume from perspiration and from extra wear where it'll get worn out. Another thing besides, as I say, the pin here, here, and here, and maybe here, where your costume, many times at the bottom, it'll fasten with a snap, but sometimes, depending on the design of it, those get pulled and that will open during performance. So those kinds of costumes, I would safety pin the cuff, even though there's a snap, if I'm not sure, because you don't want like a little bit of tail of the leg sticking out.
Sharon, would you recommend when it comes to the leg length to give a little extra when you're going to give your measurements to a tailor on the leg length, because we want a little bit of fabric to help us hold the bells? Do you give like a little extra inch or two on the leg length just for the bells?
Well,
concerning the bells?
That's a very good question. You see, it's hard to know about what the tailor's idea of what to do, because sometimes some tailors actually make it not so much Odissi, but still more Bharatanatyam, that they might make a costume to end like above the bells, which is kind of weird in a way. A little bit long. Well, you see, if you make it too long, you're going to be having, particularly in, you see, with this Mahari style, where you've got this on the front, right? In the back, you have this, and this is wrapped, or whatever. If you, again, depending on the style, sometimes if it's a little too long, you're catching your gungrus, and you can be tearing your costume or tripping on it. So you need to have it the right length, but what that right length is. Another thing is, I have noticed that tailors, okay, let me put it this way. I find that tailors are not generous enough here in the space. I think that I must move more than most Indians do, or maybe it's that Westerners have got more, I don't know, more happening, more muscle, more something, because what I find very often is that the first thing that goes is that this will pull. So there isn't enough space. They don't give you enough wiggle room here. That's one thing. As far as making it longer, I think that what I would try to do would be, if you're giving the measurement, just be very clear that you're making it to below your ankle, right? You could do that. Make it to like just below your ankle bone, and that you want it to cover.
Aryahi had a question. Do you want to ask a question, Aryahi?
I always wondered if the costume is if there's any kind of cultural conception that the costume is, it's like it's given to you by a guru or something. Like, you know, like in like maybe like a spiritual practice, you'd get like the rudraksha from your guru. And if there's any sort of like say taboo against like a, I don't know, like a beginner buying themselves a costume or something like that, or that type of thing.
And that's a very good question. That relates to your gungurus, to your bells. Um, the gungurus, like before a performance, before you put your bells on, you'll take them to your guru, and he'll give you a blessing, or she'll give you a blessing, and then you put them on. And also, when you're putting on your, you do your makeup and everything, and before you put the mukut, that's another thing, you know, that's sacred. That you say a little prayer as you, whatever, as you.
Interesting.
But that's with, and also, you're not supposed to walk around in shoes with your gungurus on.
Mm.
So that's why you would go, even if you're in costume before you go to the theater or something, because you have to get ready at home, you wouldn't put your gungurus on until you take your shoes off and you're backstage.
Right.
And generally speaking, you would only put this in before you go on stage because you're going to a sacred space. And one thing, if you're doing a Jagannath Murti of any sort, I just pulled this out. It's like, if you didn't have a Murti, there's a cloth one. You know, so if you really wanted to have one and you didn't have the image, you could always do this. You know, have a cloth. But once you're having any image, whether it's a Ganapati, Jagannath, Nataraj, then that place where you're putting it is now becoming a very special place. And so people should not be walking around with shoes on. So if you cannot control that, it's better not to have the image. And, you know, so it's like if the stage hands are mopping the floor, you wait until that's all done and no one's coming up with shoes. And I always feel red-faced when I remember once I was doing a performance in Chicago for whatever the Indian Music Society was. And the gentleman came up on the stage. I mean, nobody was there. It wasn't during the program. It was like before. And he came up and I said, you know, I'd appreciate if you'd take your shoes off. And then he showed me he had an artificial foot with the shoe attached. He couldn't take it off unless he took off his whole foot.
Oh, shame.
So,
Oops.
yeah, but it was like, oh, please, it's okay. I mean, he had a very good reason, but basically, it's you just feel kind of ouch if people are walking in what has now become a shrine. I mean, once you put the murti there, once you're going to dance, there just shouldn't be any shoed feet on that stage. But what?
So sorry, so that's super helpful. Just to clarify, you're saying the gunguru and the mukut is what is kind of the sacred parts of the costume, and the rest is sort of okay.
I mean, everything has its significance, but yeah, I would say that's the case. And
is there something about like those two pieces, maybe because they're sacred or for whatever other reason, that they should be given to you by a guru?
One time, there was a student who was doing this little nice, beautiful ritual of coming to Guruji, offering fruit, giving the thread to be tied, which I've done actually in workshops with students and everything. Tie the thread, give some fruit, da da da. You're my guru, and then afterwards I said, Guruji, I never did that. I want to do it. He said, oh, forget it. I mean, it's rituals are important depending on the meaning that you put into them, but they're not essential. You can have just as close a bond without these things. Yes, obviously, if something is given to you by your guru, that's really wonderful. But it's not like essential, or that you need to have that, like a Ranga Pravesh. I mean, the idea of having a solo performance introduction to the stage, like an Arangetram. This is not a tradition in Odissi, as it had become in Bharatanatyam, but now people do it, and you can make it quite wonderful, that it's like, wow, this is my first solo, or you can just kind of slide past that.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question. I just didn't know if there's some like cultural prohibition, like to go and buy yourself a mukut or something.
No.
I guess not.
The mukut represents the spire on the temple.
Mm-hmm.
So, from a practical point of view, it's very likely to get knocked around if you're getting in and out of a car or something. It's very hard to protect it size-wise. So it's better to keep it in your tin. I'll show you that when we do that next. But yeah, the idea that it represents that spire. So it's like, after the program, I take that off. I take the gungrus off before you do anything else. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's so lovely to know that, because unfortunately, a lot of the deeper meanings of Odissi dance culture, especially the spiritual context of it, has been dissipated from what is taught today. Today it's taught as a dance and not so much as a spiritual union. And so I never learned about, what you just shared now, about the temple. I mean, I knew it represented the temple spire, but not as it to be considered as sacred as the gungurus, as well as.
Let me put it this way. You learn things by osmosis. You learn things by example. You learn things by being around and seeing what people do. And meaning that many things just aren't explicit. I remember probably in my first year in India, when I was assisting taking the flower petals off of the stems for flowers that were going to be offered it might have been like remembrance of somebody who had died, so you've got all these flowers and then people will come up. And, we were doing it and I said, oh, they smell beautiful. And the response was, you're not supposed to smell it. The smell is the offering. See, the smell is the offering. If you're already smelling it, then you've already taken the thing. It's like you licked the ice cream cone before you gave it. So it's like, if I hadn't made that mistake by saying, oh, boy, it all smells so lovely when we're doing this thing, and it's like, and it's just like, you don't know that you never would put your foot onto a book or a paper unless you come from a tradition or you do it and someone says, your foot touched the book. If you don't come from that, you wouldn't even know that. Or a drum, just the fact that, it's not very comfortable to have to say to students at a leg dem that you can't lay down with your feet pointing to the stage when someone is going to be giving a performance. that it's disrespectful. But I mean, but one can very graciously do that. I mean, at an even more extreme, I remember giving a performance at a high school in Watts in Los Angeles, and the principal practically had an accident in his pants when he said, "Where's the rest of the group?" And I said, "It's just me." And he just thought his kids were going to tear the place apart. And I came out and I do like 2 minutes of a pallavi so they see red feet and stamping and blah, blah, blah. And afterwards they went, hoo, 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 whatever. And then I just went to the mic and I said, really, thank you for appreciation. And for this kind of program, when if you like something, you show it by applause. I mean, however I said it, it was nice and it wasn't condescending, and they were thrilled and they clapped and they loved the show. It was wonderful. So you do have to share with people these, but it's like so many of these. You see, like being with Guruji and him doing puja every day, and the things that you learn just by being around it.
Teach you.
Yeah, I mean, one time it was such a learning experience. I was finishing a summer workshop and going from Orissa to Delhi. And Guruji was also going to Delhi, but he was stopping for 2 days in Allahabad for Sanjukta Panigrahi's performance, so he would accompany her. And so he said, "You come." I went with him. And those 2 days that I was living with Sanju and her husband and the musicians was like, for me, such an education. I learned that she puts an extra bobby pin here in her hair. I learned how the artist acts to the sponsors, who goes first and who does what. And I just, I just saw normal cultural functioning of an artist getting ready for performance, performing, and how you behave with everybody, afterwards and everything. And it was just amazing and wonderful, because otherwise, how would I have ever had any access to that? I mean, she showed me how she did her hair and stuff, but it wasn't just that. It was really how she, how you have extra guests along, how you handle yourself, right? Just cultural subtleties that, so it's really important for you to ask questions, because there's things that it's hard to even remember that they're an issue to think about. Okay, ask more questions. How are we doing? Yeah.
Well, we're ready on to pass. Well, we started a little bit late today. So if anyone has more questions, you're welcome to share.
I have a question, but it's not exactly about our subject. So if nobody has any questions, or if our teacher is willing, then maybe afterwards.
Well, what's your
question?
Okay, Nikita, go ahead.
My question is that I'm originally from Kerala. So I guess you said that to dance Odissi, you should wear an Oriya sari. But part of me wonders, could I wear maybe like a sari from Kerala and then add like the Oriya border, the silk border or something, and add some kind of fusion of Kerala and Odisha to kind of, represent my origins as well?
No. I mean, it's okay, you've got to find the answer yourself. Okay. I mean, it's like rules are made to be broken, right? And what are the parameters and everything. But for instance, like one of the things, for instance, in in Odissi, is that there's this wonderful tradition of the katki filigree silver, right? But you will see dancers who are wearing Rajasthani silver jewelry. And for some people who might notice, might feel a little bit of indigestion, you know, and for others, it just looks nice and they have no idea. Um, you know, it's like I can't use tabla for Odissi, but there are dancers who do. And because again, someone coming from a certain tradition where things are comfortable, it doesn't feel like it's out. So, you know, you're not going to Orissa and doing it. Um, but the thing is that, you see, I've got like some beautiful Kerala saris, and they're really beautiful, but it doesn't really go with, to me, it doesn't work. But if you wanted to maybe use some Kerala silver jewelry,
Okay, okay, yeah.
you know, I would say do that because there's some beautiful Kerala silver jewelry. You could do that.
Mm.
And that would be a nice way. Use an Odia sari and Kerala jewelry. And another thing, like when we get into like the jewelry, is the belt that we use, you know, um, it's not etched in stone that the silver belt has to be this. And people have played around with some other things. So, yeah, I would say that. Wear the Odia sari, have the Odissi belt, and then have other things that you feel work. It's like, for instance, see, like when I went to Kerala, you know, to perform. So if I want to do something in Malayalam, I want to do something, or in whatever. So then I did like something that's Swati Tirunel, and something like Aliveni, which is Sringara Bhakti, right? So it's like very, you know, representative, but very familiar. And then next time it's like, okay, I'm always doing Sringara, I want to do Vatsalya. So I did Omana Tingal, you know, but I did it with a slight difference. Omana Tingal, guys, it's a lullaby that everybody knows. And so, but I did that as Vatsalya, the mother's love for the baby. But the difference that I did was all of these things with the baby. And then at the end, you realize that the child is going off to the guru. He's learned to write, learn to walk, learn to dance. And now the child is grown and the child goes off and the mother is singing Om Mani Tingal to herself. You know, so just a little twist. Or like, you know, anyway, but I would say do that. I would say you could do that. Okay.
Thank you.
But you see, again, I'm telling my aesthetic, and you know, you've got to figure out what's pushing the parameters too much. But I just think that, and a Kerala sari, that beautiful gold band, it's such a strong statement. And then it's like you're doing Mohiniyattam. You know, and then they'll say you're not doing or you're doing what's the new word? I forget the new name. The dance form that's been created, that's kind of a nice mix that they do in schools.
Fusion.
It's not
Satriya.
No. That's not. That's another. No, in Kerala, I'm blanking on the name.
The Kerala Nadanam, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me do.
Okay.
So it's like, you know, it's not as heavy duty, as like Kathakali or Krishnattam, but it's got a little bit of that, and it's got a little bit of Mohiniyattam, and it's Kerala, and it's nice, and it's kind of a classical folk, kind of, something that you could actually do in your school days and be able to perform, and it's fine. Okay. I don't know what made me think about that, but yeah. So if you were to wear a Kerala sari, you would look like you were doing that. I mean, that's just like off the top of my head. That's what it feels like. You don't want to mix it up. Okay. Any other question?
Isabella, would you like to speak now?
Thank you. So then another question came up that I was thinking I'll ask tomorrow, but perhaps it's suitable now, because sometimes some jewelries, as you mentioned about jewelry, I have experience with Orissa jewelry that sometimes they cause allergy, or they leave a lot of green, like green on the arms, and then like pain in ears, this kind of thing, the pain in nose. I don't know if others have the same experience. And then I thought about some, like some replacement with some kind of a proper, at least some beads with some kind of a proper silver, or sometimes with natural pearls, something like gotipuas were, but something small. If this is all right, I hope it's okay.
It's not uncommon for people to be allergic to artificial jewelry, so you need to wear silver. At least.
But actually, I'm sorry, actually I meant Orissa silver, because this Orissa silver, actually it's causing allergy. I talk about silver from
Silver.
Orissa.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if this is just me or everyone, but or I'm just exception.
No,
But
anybody can be allergic to different things, and have different kinds of reactions. It's also, okay, one thing is different people have different reactions, but the other thing is like depending on the quality of the silver, what percentage of silver and what alloy was used, who you got it from, and that's always a challenge. And there's no question that foreigners, international artists, anywhere in the world are very often taken advantage of. You not only have your what we call the foreign tax, you get to pay extra, but the assumption that you can get scammed and there's no repercussions. So I mean, I don't have any allergies, so the issue of how much silver is there. One thing I know with people that have some problems, it can also be the post. In other words, if the post isn't silver, if it's a metal something else. But another thing that you could do would be to have like your jumki, which is silver, but have like a gold stud that would hold it up. We can talk about that tomorrow. I'll see if I can find some samples.
okay, thank you. And may I ask you a question, or?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I thought about one thing that sometimes, because as I understood from Natya Shastra, that Odissi is actually the original dance style that was taught by the demigods and by the like Krishna's family, Usha, and then it was Odissi came from there and then to the Odha region, that is Orissa. And then from my understanding is that Odissi is this kind of a first dance style, the most original one. And then obviously the Bharatanatyam dancers sometimes say differently, that they can refer to their literature, that Bharatanatyam is actually this kind of a pure original form. So would you like to comment about it?
First of all, Odissi and Bharatanatyam, which came from Southern Nitra, and this that came from other things, basically, these traditions are all neoclassical. They are all reconstructed from sources that go all the way back. Yes, it says in the Natya Shastra that the dance of Odra Desh, or the place that where we have the dance coming from, that it was known for its abhinaya. But what that dance was has no supportable lineage to what you see today. You can say that in 250 BC, we have the relief sculptures of dancers on the extant Sanskrit theater at the Kalinga. Yes, but what those dancers were dancing has no relation to what we're doing. There are many texts, different encyclopedias, basically, which is what all of these scriptures are, which will say a capsule of what dance looked like at a certain time, regional variations. Yeah, we look at the sculpture in order to reconstruct. And nothing is the oldest. And it can be said, if you want to make these kind of like, number one, if you look at the Karanas, which is, in Chittambaram, there's like the 101 sculptures of Karanas, different things. And then Padma Subramaniam's research has made it clear that Karanas are not poses, that there are different temples which have different poses, and it's actually a phrase, Karanas. And then of these Karanas, you can find some of them in every dance form, from Manipuri, to probably even ballet. But you could say that Odissi has more Karanas that are actually from the original, because there's also the Bandha Nritya, the acrobatic things that are there in the Gotipur dance, which are part of Odissi. Anyway, one can talk a lot about how things evolved and why they evolved and everything. But to say that Odissi is the oldest dance form is unsupportable. Just as Bharatanatyam dancers saying that theirs is the oldest is unsupportable. But we can say that they all evolved out of a spiritual consciousness, that there was a tradition of dance being offered in temples. We know that in Orissa we've got wonderful Yogini temple, one of the few extant that still has Devis there. And that there was a tradition of tantric Buddhist dance, which was totally wiped out, by the Brahmins later, but it was there. And we talk about Jagannath Puri, we talk about Shiva temples earlier, but there were also Devi things, but it's pretty much lost, right? Okay, I think we're going to stop for tonight. Everybody needs coffee or go to bed.
Thank you, Sharon. It was a delight, as always,
Thank you so much.
being your presence. Thank you, everyone.
Makeup, ornaments, and hair. Right.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good night, Sharon. Have a good day, everyone. See you tomorrow.